good. How are you?
Very good, thank you very much. How's your day been?
Interesting.
Oh, how come?
I was in a very dramatic meeting.
All right, okay.
Where my boss had a fight with Scottish Government, which was fun.
Wow, okay.
And I finally got a fluffy thing, like Nick's fluffy thing, which makes me very happy.
Show me your fluffy thing. Is it to hand, your fluffy thing?
I'm wearing it.
Oh, your hair?
No, my fluffy thing.
Oh, I see what you mean. That looks super cozy.
You'll have seen Nick wearing his in all the story times.
Yes, I do remember it now. Yes, yeah.
Although mine is blue, which means I look slightly less like a teddy.
Oh.
I would often see you wearing mine.
No, you usually get to wear it at Storytime time.
Storytime time.
Hey, Kitty.
Hello.
Hey.
Kitty, when we're allowed to be in the same house again, can you come and lean on me in various uncomfortable and beneficial positions?
Absolutely. How's your back? I saw that you are having some issues.
Oh, it's just, normal person who sits in a computer chair all day back.
Yeah. That'll do it. Sorry.
It's okay.
Have you been moving them around?
I mean, I did yoga.
Oh, fuck yeah.
With Shri, and it was super lovely.
Oh. Everything's super lovely with Shri.
Yeah, Shri is a blessing.
And then I drank lots of blackcurrant vodka. Because it needed more sugar added to it, but the only way you can know how much more sugar to add is to add some sugar and then have a taste.
How unfortunate. Yeah.
No.
So she's extra smiley.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hi, Zach.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Oh, there.
Yeah. Did I tell you about how I absolutely fucking loved your cinnamon rolls? Because I absolutely fucking loved your cinnamon rolls.
Oh, thank you. Yes,
like aggressively. It was so good.
Glad they arrived safely. Yeah, I stuck them in the post and then read a news story about how the local Bristol Post Depot had like a bomb scare or something. Like, well, they might take a while to get to Glasgow then.
Oh shit.
Well, it was like a suspicious package. Whatever that means. Frankie Porter is host now.
Hi, sweetie.
Hi.
How you doing?
Baby.
Hi, sweeties. Ooh. Hi, all of the sweeties.
Many sweeties.
So many sweeties. We've got the
like a sweetie shop.
Sweeties.
Yeah, we just caught up. We were part of the catch-up crew. It was glorious.
Yeah. That voice of yours, an inspired choice as always.
Yeah.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I may not be some fancy big city circus proprietor.
I'm already regretting my choice.
It's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, I could hear you snapping your suspenders as you read it. Now, let me interrupt this tense monologue with a sip from my mint julep.
Ooh, mint juleps. I was very tempted to have yet another margarita tonight, but I managed to lay off because I am fast kind of incubating a drinking problem. It's fine. It's fine. How's everyone doing? How y'all doing, you beauties?
Pretty good. Been hard at work editing Harriet Porter.
Ah, how exciting! How exciting! I cannot wait to hear the whole thing.
I can't wait for everyone to hear yours.
Was it okay? Did the because I haven't listened back to it. Did is the dog barking in the middle of it too offensive? Because I can record it. I can re-record it if it's like.
I will double check and I will get back to you. But I just did like a quick kind of first 30 seconds to check it was like the file was okay and stuff. But,
Cool.
What's the sheep been doing?
It's my chapter of Harriet Porber, which is the Chuck Tingle novel, which Rory is organising a kind of mass reading of.
Okay.
And I recorded my chapter when I was staying at Emma's, and she had gone to work, I think, and there was just like like Sam had gone out for a meeting in town, so I thought, oh, perfect, this is like the ideal opportunity to record my chapter when no one is in. And about like 10 minutes into it, I heard him come home.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh no.
And your chapter is one of the sex scene ones, isn't it?
Yeah. I was like, okay, well, I mean, I've started now. Like, should I just keep going?
Yeah.
Like,
we are still talking about reading, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, is that what Magnus Magnuson says when he's having sex? I'll start it, so I'll finish.
Yeah, I'm a method actor. What can I say? Yeah, just trying to like really like quietly fake orgasmic screams. Well, because I hadn't even told him what I was going to be doing. Like, I kind of got downstairs afterwards. I was like, could you hear anything just now?
I love that Katie's like, what the fuck?
Girls gotta live, you know.
You know, as your chapter approaches the climax, I'm just going to fade in the triumphant music from Jurassic Park. Do, 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 do.
Hey, where does the dog barking come into it then?
Oh, Flynn was downstairs, and like I think there was a delivery. Like somebody came to the door, and Flynn does not like the postman.
Oh, not dog barking noises that you were making as part of this.
Oh no, I wasn't. Yeah, that's the noise that a woman makes when she reaches climax. Everyone knows that. Dog bark.
I did used to play a game with friends. We try and one-up each other in terms of the most off-putting sound that you could make while achieving climax.
I once saw a porno where somebody said "booyah." That was pretty bad.
Was it like a sexy porno? Like it wasn't like a spoof porno. Was it supposed to be
No,
sexy?
it was a. Yeah, they were all very serious about it.
I came across a Yahoo answer one time
Gross.
where someone was saying, my boyfriend keeps yelling penis power at the moment of climax, so I make him stop. Personally, I've always enjoyed. Thank you. I'm sorry.
But yes, Frankie, you're right. Every time a woman comes, she does in fact make barking sounds. I remember before I came out, I did that, and when I came out, when I was like, "Oh my god, I'm non-binary," like suddenly the barking stopped. It was incredible.
Just entirely replaced.
Yep, 100%. I no longer bark. I came out to my parents this weekend.
Holy shit!
Okay.
Yeah. I'd been talking with a friend early in the day and joking about the most inappropriate things I could say, though. So, of course, what comes out other than like, oh, hey, by the way, the name thing is such a big deal. Like, because surprise, I'm non-binary. It's a surprise Rosh Hashanah gender reveal party. Oh, yeah, it went like fine. They just kind of mostly acted normal. My dad was like, really? And I think it was just more so really because of how I did it than anything.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
That's huge. Yeah.
Thanks. I haven't seen them since though, and I'm seeing them later today, so we'll see how that goes.
Dip the apple and the honey. By the way, I'm non. No, got the syllables wrong.
Who else have we got? Gordon, how are you feeling after meditation?
I was very calm until I appeared here, and I was waiting for like circuses and all sorts of things, and we've just got dogs barking and the best gender reveal party ever. So who knows what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
It's just you land here and it's like whoosh.
Can I share a wonderful holiday picture that I found when I was looking through my pictures?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It features some wonderful facial expressions.
Oh, wow.
What's going on?
How did you... Samuel Beckett is looking amazing for his age.
This is very
Look
strong jump
so
again.
cozy.
Yeah, that's like it looks like an advert for some kind of Scandi lifestyle magazine.
Jay playing
Yeah.
rules.
So what are we looking at?
Do you guys
That's
have
the
the British
question.
Tommy Hilfiger? Because it feels like it could also be like a Tommy Hilfiger ad, like some kind of like cozy cabin wear kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's story time.
What time is it? Is it story time?
Yeah.
Story time. Okay. Right. Also, before we get started, I have divided the book up based on the number of pages that we read last night, because this is a very professional and scientific outfit that we're running here. And so I now know when the final session is going to be. So the book will finish on the 7th, October 7th. Put it in your diaries. Start growing your hair long now so that it is like down to your ass by the 7th.
So if that's
Damn it,
a
I just booked the
Wednesday,
haircut.
Don't do it.
if that's a Wednesday, we could have the Thursday off and have another saucy time.
Interesting. Maybe. I'm going to put a maybe in that. But you intrigue me strangely. Now,
Send Frankie your saucy time submissions. It's the maybe. Send them to Frankie. Preferably things that aren't poems, because it sounds like she has quite a bit of those. Find your fanfics. Find your saucy songs.
You two catch up crew.
yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. God, I love you too. I love you all. Right. Everyone be quiet. Quiet in the cheap seats. Now. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Chapter 2. Callanish. Callanish could always predict the weather because the Graces told her. Under clear skies, they stayed silent in their cages, their movements slowing as they starved. But when storms were due, they couldn't be at rest. They'd pweet and muss, shuddering their wings so that the murky green-blue feathers stuck out at defensive angles. Callanish couldn't help but feel their disquiet. The morning slipped by in silence, broken only by the shift and coo of the Graces. Callanish sat on the front porch of the house, perched at the edge, feet tucked under so they wouldn't touch the water. In the distance, ships passed, tiny as toys. The sea here was busy with fish, but Callanish would not catch them. She knew that fish had to eat something, and all living things grew from dead things, and there was no point being squeamish about it. But it was different when you had seen the bodies, when you knew their names, when you had laid them to rest with your own hands. In eating the fish, Callanish would have felt that she was eating the bodies. Sometimes she could almost laugh. Surrounded by a fish-rich sea, she had enough food and water to last her a lifetime, but she could have none of it. A resting was due that afternoon, so after her morning of silence, Callanish went inside to prepare. The Grace was ready. When she entered the house, he was huddled in the corner of his cage, head under his wing, speckled feathers puffing around the metal bars. He knew that a storm would come soon, but that there was nothing he could do to get away from it. I know the feeling, said Callanish to the Grace, and she dropped 5 sunflower seeds into the cage. She wasn't supposed to feed the Graces, but she believed that some people deserved a longer remembrance. She'd already met some of the crew who were coming for the resting, and her stomach clenched to think of the quickness in their smiles, their relief when they saw that the Grace was so small. She wished she'd chosen a bigger Grace for the dead man, but it was too late. All she could do now was sneak it some food to make it live longer. Real grief, and Callanish didn't feed the Grace. Those people didn't need the Grace's death to tell them when mourning was over. Ships rarely came back to check anyway. The birds were bred to be tiny and they could not live long, caged without food or fresh water. Callanish didn't feel bad about feeding the Graces. It was such a small crime. She checked that her white dress was dry, then pulled it off the line and over her head. It was hardened with salt, and she stretched out her shoulders to loosen the fabric. Her filter wasn't working properly, and she hadn't wanted to waste drinking water on laundry. She roped her silver blonde hair at the back of her head, looping it low over her ears to hide her scars, and added a spray of white flowers. Fake, but no one would expect them to be real. White silk gloves, white silk slippers, both sewn by her mother and re-stitched over the ears. She couldn't trade for these. They had been specially made to disguise the webbing between her fingers and toes. Callanish was always kept busy as a Gracekeeper. At least 2 restings a week, always. People liked a Gracekeeper who looked young, innocent, unthinkably far from her own death. For lunch she ate rye bread and honey, drank a bone cup of milk about to turn. Only eating landlocker food meant that quantities were small and there was never quite enough of anything. She wouldn't mind dampling food, but worried about her reputation as a Gracekeeper if she requested it. Callanish could not remember how it felt to be full. More supplies would arrive with the resting group. A large parcel of body, along with a small parcel of soap and eggs and gold. Graceyards were not a destination. Lined up along the equator as they were, deep in the doldrums, they were places for passing through. Perfect for the dead. Perfect for Callanish. She hoped that the resting party would arrive before the weather turned. The Graces had been restless all morning, but the sky stayed pale. Callanish strained her eyes in every direction, but she couldn't see any storm clouds. What she could see, though, was the approach of a small tin rowing boat. The resting party was on its way, and Callanish was ready to perform. After the service, before Callanish could grasp the oars to row back to the dock, the widow grabbed her wrists. Callanish tensed all her muscles. If the widow's hands moved down from Callanish's wrists, if the gloves were to slip, then they would see her hands, and they would know, and they would tell. Callanish already knew what she would do if she was revealed. It would be so easy to tip herself off the side of the boat and into the water. Then she would straighten her body like a dart and sink right down to the bottom of the sea. It was the only way. But the widow, it seemed, only wanted to thank her. She gripped Callanish's exposed wrists as she spoke, and her hands felt damp and swollen, the palms soft with fresh blisters from the boat's oars. "He was," said the widow, then trailed off. She spoke in fummels and halves, as if she could not get enough breath to speak proper words. "I know," said Callanish, doing her best expression of sympathy, trying not to let the panic show. It was a fine line. She had to stay noble and restrained, as a Gracekeeper should, but she did not want to be unkind. She took the widow's hands in her own, noticing how her wedding ring dug into her finger, making the flesh bulge out at either side. Callanish wondered whether she would wear it until it was engulfed in her own flesh, forming a secret totem. She had a flash of the dead man's hands, the way she'd tied them in fists before wrapping him in the netting so that his fingers wouldn't poke through. She kept her own fingers pressed tight together. Callanish placed the widow's hands back in her lap and let go, pretending that she was checking the Grace's cage. It was one of the finer ones, and she had made sure to polish its bars to a shine. The effect wouldn't last long in the salt water, but it didn't matter as long as it looked good for the resting. She regretted feeding the Grace. The others on the man's ship might be eager to finish mourning him, but she saw now that his wife wouldn't be back to check on the Grace. Not because she didn't care, but because she would remember her husband no matter when the Grace died. Callanish pulled on the oars to draw the rowboat back to the dock. No matter what she felt, the show must go on. She said the words, she performed the actions, she took her payment. But she only mimed grief. She didn't mean it. How could she? She didn't know this man beyond his stitched shut face and his wife's too tight wedding ring. Sometimes she pretended that she was saying the words of the service about her mother. This helped. And on the darkest days, she'd had to leave long pauses for fear that her voice would crack. After those restings, she'd sit down to write a letter to her mother, but she rarely finished them and never sent them. "Farewell," said Callanish in a soothing sort of voice as the crew climbed back into their boat. "Farewell," they chorused solemnly, and she knew that they were really saying it to the man they'd lost. Everyone played a role at arresting. Legally, all dead damplings had to be interred in a graceyard, but Callanish knew that didn't always happen. If someone died in the far north or south, could a crew really be expected to keep the body on board for the months it took to reach the equator? And so it would be tied in canvas and tipped overboard, and the family would decide their own time of mourning, and the dead would end up as a meal for the fishes, just as they would in a graceyard. Such small crimes. As the little boat sailed away, back to the main ship anchored at the edge of the graceyard, Callanish felt that one end of a fine thread was tied to the boat's stern and the other to her ribs. With every beat of the oars, she felt something over her heart stretch and stretch until it might break. A string, like the one between a body and its Grace. But all threads broke eventually. It was for the best. For Callanish, being alone was safer. She turned away from the retreating boat and went back into the house, carrying the parcel of supplies with her. For one adult resting, she was paid a mix of food, supplies, and tradable goods. 10 eggs, a thick wedge of bacon, a hank of fabric for letter writing, a lump of copper the size of her thumbnail. It was fine. It was enough. What else could she need? She would eat tonight, and that was all that mattered. She stacked the items on the shelf and found herself humming so loudly that her throat burned. It reminded her that she was still there. She could eat and she could breathe. She lived. She would write a letter to her mother tomorrow. When it started to get dark, Callanish sat out on the porch, her feet tucked up, a cup of milk in her hand. To keep her white dress clean, she'd exchanged it for a grey one. She was alone, and so she did not need her gloves or her slippers. The sea reflected the sky in a mass of fire. Sunset is fast at the equator. Blink in the day, open your eyes to the night. As a child, Callanish had imagined chunks of land floating on a globe of sea, held by thick chains fastened to anchors the size of castles. She had asked her mother what would happen if the chains were to rust away, if the countries were to bump and jostle one another. Would they become attached? Would bridges be built where only sea had been before? Or would the edge of one country tip under another, upending it like a toy tug carrying too many pebbles at one end. "Your brain is upside down," her mother had said. "Land does not float on sea. The earth is a solid mass like a rubber ball, and oceans sit in cups carved out of land. No matter how deep the sea, there is always land at the bottom of it. Land decides water, not the other way around." It was only when she'd been left in her new home at the Graceyard that Callanish realised her mother was wrong. Land would never choose this. Water had decided the shape of the world. She sipped her milk and watched the sea roll out in every direction, mirror flat. There was nothing, nothing, nothing. And then there was something. A shadow on the horizon, moving closer. There was no resting due, no meeting with a bereaved family, and Callanish swithered on the porch, not sure whether she should change back into her white dress. She squinted her eyes until she was sure that there was only one person in the rowing boat. One person, no bundle of body. She put on her gloves and slippers, then sat back down on the porch, finished her cup of milk, and waited. "Ahoy!" gasped the stranger, still a few boat lengths away from the deck. Callanish couldn't help smiling at the old-fashioned term. "Ahoy," she replied, and stood to help the stranger climb out of the rowing boat. Except that the stranger was not exactly a stranger. "I know you," she said. "Odell, is it?" She waited for him to catch his breath. It was a fair distance to row. "Well remembered," he finally said. "It's been a while, a year or so, I think. When I first arrived for that little tour to the neighbours. I forget the name of the fellow on the other side. Time acts funny around here and I lose track sometimes." Adele stood on the dock, shifting from one foot to the other. "It's nice to see you again." "My name is Callanish." Right. You know what it's like out here, He slapped his forehead. "Callanish. I'll remember that now." Callanish couldn't think of a polite way to say, "What do you want?" She should invite him in, she should get him a cup of milk. Instead, she stood awkwardly on the porch. Adele reached down to his rowing boat and pulled out a bottle, tilting his head as a question. Callanish went into the house and got her bowl. Adele would just have to be happy drinking from it, as she didn't have another cup. Gracekeepers were given one cup, one plate, one bowl, one spoon. They were not expected to entertain visitors. Adele filled the bowl from the bottle without comment, then went to tip some into Callanish's empty cup. She shook her head. "I can't." "Yes, you can." She let him fill the cup. They sat on the porch together, and Odell tugged off his shoes and let his feet dangle in the water. Fish clustered around his toes, gulping at the surface of the water. Callanish suppressed a shudder. The sun had tipped below the horizon, leaving the sky inky and a chill in the air. "You've been doing this longer than me. Does it get easier?" She shrugged. The liquid in the cup burned her throat as she drank. "Thought so," he said. The only sound was the tick of the fish's mouths against the water. Callanish was sure she could hear Odell's heart beating. "Was my choice to do this?" he said, as if she'd asked a question. "My wife, she got into religion. Clapping and chanting, like on the revival boats, you know. All burning and swooning. And I tried to get her back. Spoke to the preacher, all gentleman-like, but he was having none of it. Got heated, like it does, and maybe things went too far. It was a matter of the heart, you know. Anyway, I won." So Adele had hit a man, beaten a man, maybe killed a man. It made no difference to Callanish. But if he was determined to tell her, she'd let him talk. "I won, but Rosh still wouldn't come back to me. She told the island council, and they gave me a choice, and, well, you know how it goes." He motioned to Callanish's house, to the rows of grace cages, to the endless sea. "Of course you know. It was my choice, really. I thought, I can be one better than a preacher. I can be holy. I can be a hermit, you know. He refilled his bowl and glanced at Callanish. There was nothing to see on the horizon, but she kept her gaze on it anyway, so she wouldn't have to look at Odell. I told Rush that it wasn't all about her, that I had my own life too, and I had to leave the island because I didn't want to see her face every single day, you know. So I did it. I left. I chose to become holy. His tone dared Callanish to argue. She didn't argue. I didn't do anything wrong. I really didn't. And it's not even a punishment, really, when you think about it. It's more of a step up, you know? Your very own island. He drained his bowl and made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. Well, it's not a boat, so it must be an island. At least it doesn't move. Want some more? Callanish tipped her cup towards him. He refilled it, and then his bowl. She felt goosebumps rise along her arms from the cooling air, and she drank again to feel the warmth of it. Her limbs began to relax, her feet dipping closer to the water. It's not right that we're stuck out here, you know, went on Adele. I should be able to leave whenever I want. The silence stretched. Callanish felt her throat close around all the words she did not want to say. You make your own choices, she said. I know, but we have to live with them for the rest of our lives. Just leave. Your island council won't even know you've gone until a delivery man comes by. They can't hurt you if they can't find you. Where am I supposed to go? I can't ever go back to my island. There's more to the world than islands. You mean boats? Asked Adele. Callanish shrugged. Islands or boats, it was all the same. She didn't care. She wanted to drink and slip into the water and live in the sea forever. Come on, I can't live on a boat, not a dumpling. It was bad enough coming here on that big ship. First time my feet left land, you know. Now look at me. Toes wet, no islands for miles. He made an ugh sound, a snort, and shifted his feet in the water. The fish scattered. Going out in the rowing boat makes me sick, but at least it's temporary. Life at sea. That's no life at all. He fiddled with his bowl, turning it between his palms, and his movements were jerky as if he was annoyed, as if Callanish had not fulfilled some promise she didn't remember making. This was not the first time that she had heard a confession. With some restings, people did not play their proper roles. They thought that Callanish was something she was not. After the body had sunk, after the grace was settled, they turned to her. Hunched in the boat's prow, or speaking in a monotone while staring at the horizon, they'd confessed to her. They'd lied or hurt or killed, and they wanted her to make it all better. She couldn't fix anything, but she could listen and stay quiet, and that had always been enough. Eventually tears were dried, spines were straightened, and Callanish would pull the boat back to the dock. That's the choice, she said to Adele. Here or there, dumpling or landlocker, sea or land, man or woman. But this is something different. Don't you see? We made our homes on the sea and on the land. We can stay here in the graceyards and be nothing. I mean, be neither. Adele was not listening. The bottle was empty now, and he had started talking again, his words merging. It was as if Callanish had never spoken. She glanced up, and the world spun, the grace cages doubling. She blinked them straight again. I don't know if I can do it, Adele said. This type of life, it's impossible. How could anyone? Why should anyone? It's a punishment, but we haven't done anything wrong. Not really. It can be forgiven. If he thought that Gracekeepers were holy, then she'd be holy for him. She'd hear his confession, and then he'd go back to his graceyard, and he'd never come back, and everything would be fine. He'd stay and do his job, or he'd buy his way onto a boat and do something else, and she'd never even know. But she would not give him a confession in return. "I don't want to fall into the sea and drown," he said. "They haven't told us about that. If I die, will they leave me there? Or will they dive down and get my body? Will you rest me? If you die, am I supposed to rest you?" "I don't know. I suppose so. But I don't want to die here. I want to go home and be burned on sacred copsewood. I want my ashes to be scattered at the world tree. Is it wrong to want that when I chose to leave? Can I have that? I want that. I don't want to die, but I want to die on my island. What do you want?" Callanish did not answer. She let the silence stretch until Adele filled it by draining his bowl for the last time. She stood and walked over to his rowing boat. He followed unsteadily, leaving a line of wet footprints across the porch. She shouldn't have drunk so much. The sea pulled at her, stronger than ever. "Can I come back?" Adele murmured. "It's so quiet out here. Listening to records doesn't... it's not the same. Sometimes you need to say things and have someone respond." His head was bowed. He seemed to be speaking to the flat water, the silvery fish, the uneven boards of the dock. "I know," said Callanish, doing her best expression of sympathy. Noble, restrained. She was a good gracekeeper. Adele got into his boat and rowed off through the neat lines of grace cages. Callanish watched until his shadow disappeared. She kept her back pressed to the wall of her house, away from the pull of the sea. Her breathing sounded as loud as waves. She went inside and lay back down on her bed, face turned to the window, until light came back to the sky. Chapter 3. North. North and her bear poked their heads up out of their coracle to watch as they approached the first island. Though it was not a capital, it seemed wealthy. Guards were stationed to steer their convoy into harbour, and there were strings of spirit lamps between the tower blocks to light the way. Even the tower blocks themselves seemed healthy. Instead of pitted metal sidings, the buildings had plants growing from them in neat rows. It looked as if the residents would be able to lean out of their windows and pick food for dinner. It was a shame that landlockers were so snobby about dumpling food. They could probably hook fish and seaweed from their windows too. Then they could stay in their houses and would never have to put their feet on that grubby land at all. At these signs of wealth and order, North flicked her eyes to the lead boat, where Red Gold stood at the wheel. In preparation for going ashore, he'd put on his most expensive shirt, the one with rows and rows of paper ruffles across the breadth of his chest. It was ludicrous to use something as expensive as paper to make clothes, but the landlockers were always impressed by it. It made the Excalibur's warped wooden hull and the rash of rust on the coracles seem glamorously faded rather than decrepit. After all, if a man were too poor to look after his boats, he wouldn't spend money on a paper shirt. North could only see the back of Red Gold's head, but knew from the set of his shoulders that he was thinking dangerous thoughts. Sometimes traditional islands liked a traditional show. Sometimes they wanted more subversion than even this circus could provide. Often their preference only became clear when they got the opposite of what they wanted. Many circus folk had spent nights on the prison boat for going too far, and many more were scarred from being pelted with shells and stones by bored crowds who felt they had not gone far enough. North had a jagged dash of scar tissue on her arm from the edge of a mussel shell, and there was a notch in her bear's ear that would never close. Ensel emerged, unhooking his coracle from the Excalibur and attaching it to the mess boat. The coracles formed an anchored circle, with the Excalibur floating separately, attached only by a rope. When it was time to perform, the crew would pull themselves ashore on a raft using that rope. It was awkward, but it was the only way. The landlockers didn't want the damplings to be on land any more than they had to be, and North was quite happy with that. Red Gold bowed to a landlocker, and a contraption of hooks and chains eased the Excalibur up onto land. The ringmaster swaggered down to greet the port crew with barely a wobble in his legs. North frowned. Maybe he really was a landlocker. It made sense to her that someone would give up a pile of bricks on a patch of dirty soil, even if it were only to live on a run-down circus boat. The Excalibur might be a little dented, but it was still a boat. It could get you from one end of the world to the other. Land was useless. It couldn't take you anywhere at all. She knew there must be a reason that Red Gold had left his home island, but she was afraid to ask. As North watched, the crew piled onto the raft and pulled themselves to the Excalibur, ready to begin the work of turning the boat into a circus. They'd get no help from the people on the island. Landlockers didn't like to go closer to the water than the black shore, the line of seaweed brought up by the high tide, and sometimes you'd think they believed the seaweed itself was cursed. North didn't know where the superstition had come from, but she was glad of it. It meant that if the damplings ever had to escape, there was the safety of distance. Weapons could be thrown across the black shore, but landlockers would be reluctant to cross, and so they couldn't follow the boats. North tried to relax. There was no reason yet to think that escape would be necessary this evening, but she knew from experience that a crowd could turn in an instant. Still, no point worrying. They were ashore now, so they had no choice to perform. She turned away, back to her bear. Together they ate their meagre dinner and began their preparations for that night's show. The glamours from the beauty boat had made North a collection of coloured powders and liquids, all of which were safe on her bear's fur. Even if he ate them, he'd be fine, though North would rather not have to scrub green goop off his tongue. She knew from the dread weighing heavy in her stomach that Red Gold was going to ask her to do the funeral waltz. She twisted open the tub of black powder and got to work. Behind curtains smelled of seaweed and soil. North's bear was in their coracle, resting before their act, but North could not stay still. Red Gold had listened to none of her worries about the funeral waltz. The crowd would bay for it, and that's all that mattered. Instead of getting more and more frantic, she was calming herself by watching the show. The evening began with the maypole, feral and fleshly as ever. Then the horse show. Ensel turning backflips and cartwheels on the narrow space of his horse's trotting back. Avalon riding around him in circles, simpering side saddle like a queen, draped in flowers, her belly round as a full moon. Her pregnancy fitted the fertile springtime theme of the show, but the bump had to be visible from the highest seats, so most of it was still padding. Her horse was pure white, though North knew that its bridle had to be carefully positioned to hide the red birthmark on its cheek. In the circus, nothing was as simple as it seemed. Avalon used to leap through fire, but since the pregnancy she did nothing but posture, her horse merely a prop. Ensel was painted in shades of gold and purple, and his horse's bridle was studded with silver bells, each movement making its own music. Even North had to admit that he was beautiful when he performed. The circus acts continued. Barrow the fire breather toyed with hot coals. The glamours flirted in suspenders and waistcoats. The clowns stalked them ladishly while dressed in corsets, and the applause increased with each passing moment. Between acts, North peeked out from behind the curtain to get a look at the crowd. As ever on the islands, the men and women were separate, with all the children on the women's side. She looked for the subtle signs that they'd identify with the Circus Excalibur's gender play. Women with shorn hair, men sitting close enough to touch. Nothing. Still, the more conservative the island was, the more the landlockers might be desperate for subversion. The small, fenced-off section reserved for visiting damplings was full to overflowing. North could only hope that they weren't from a revival boat. The last act before the interval was North's favourite, Melia and Whitby. Tonight they were aerialists, their ropes strung up high between the Excalibur's two masts. They began on the ground, their turquoise hair and silver bodysuits rendering them mirror images. In the centre of the stage hung a pair of long ropes. As the music began, the acrobats wrapped a rope around their waists and began to roll up it in a series of planches, their bodies rolling, their delicate legs pointed like compass needles. Higher and higher they climbed, tilting the crowd's heads further and further. At the highest point of the big top, they spiraled off and landed neatly on a tiny platform strung with ropes. The spotlight was trained only on them, leaving the rest in darkness. For a moment they were lost in an explosion of white as they smacked chalk between their palms, letting the excess drift down into darkness. Wrapping his wrists and ankles in ropes, Whitby bent his body into a crescent moon. Melia dropped from the platform and hung from the curve of his body for 2 breaths before letting go, falling to the ground like a comet. At the last moment, she hooked her arm into a loop of rope, muscles pulsing. The crowd let out a smudge of noise, a mix of screams, gasps, moans. She began to sway her body, building up momentum, letting her weight widen the circle until she was swinging a circuit around the entire big top, far above the tilted heads of the crowd. Even from behind curtains, North could see the incredible strain on Melia's arms. She shifted position to get a better hold, and North let out an "oh" as Melia seemed to lose her grip. She fell 2 body lengths on the rope, unable to hold it, and there was no net. There was no safety line, and there was not enough time for anyone to run out and catch her. North screwed her eyes shut. But there was no scream, no thud of a fallen body. North looked up to see Whitby, knees wrapped in the rope, arms spread, holding Melia's wrists. Their smiles stretched wide. They were not siblings or spouses, as they pretended. They were 2 halves of the same whole. Not everyone found the key to their lock, the answer to their question. But they had. They took their bows high above the crowd, letting the applause float up like birds. North was still catching her breath, trying to calm herself, when Red Gold dropped the curtain for the interval. It was time for the bear girl to die. A few more pages. Hidden from the audience behind a curtain, North was centre stage, all in white. She was luminous, motionless, her spread arms bound to a huge whalebone cross that was wrapped in the blood-red ribbons of the maypole. Her bear was still behind curtains at the edge of her vision. He was wrapped in golden chains with his fur powdered black as night. At the other side of the stage crouched Barrow, readying the needle of the wind-up gramophone. They each wore a tiny brass bell tied around one wrist. Even when performing, they could not forget what they really were. Usually Red Gold introduced each act in lascivious detail, his voice booming halfway across the island to entice latecomers. But not this act. Although she couldn't see him from behind the curtain, North knew what he was doing. Walking out on stage, standing serious-faced in front of the curtain. Now he was removing his hat. Now he was dropping his head in a play of grief. Now he was walking off stage, feet dragging. She threw her head back and closed her eyes. The curtain lifted in silence on North, white as ice, crucified, lost in the throes of ecstasy or agony. The audience did not make a sound. They didn't seem to dare. The spotlight stayed on North for far longer than was comfortable. She could hear the audience shift in their seats, not sure what to think, not sure if this was all part of the act. North kept her face tilted upwards and tried not to let her chest rise. She felt her tiptoed feet begin to slip on the support at the base of the cross and tensed her thigh muscles as hard as she could. She would not fall. Whatever happened, she would not fall. There was nothing more important than putting on a perfect show. A moment more. Then a crackle from the gramophone, a shift in the spotlight. Violins juddered as her bear thudded four-pawed onto the stage. The crowd flinched back as one at the sight of the bear, then, after a heartbeat, leaned forward in a wave of curiosity. No one was looking at North now. At that cue, she extended the first two fingers of both hands, freeing the razor blades tucked against her palms. Her bear approached. His black fur merged with the black curtain so that all that was clear were the fine lines of his chains. He raised himself up on his back legs. The violins reached a shriek, and, unnoticed, North used the razor blades to slice through the ropes. The music stopped. The spotlight burned bright, and North tumbled off the cross and into her bear's arms. She knew that all the audience could see was the hulking shadow of the bear, and herself, draped, pale and silent in his grasp. The violins increased, denser, louder, swooping and diving as the bear staggered around the stage with North's lifeless body in his arms. He lifted her, presenting her to the crowd in his grief. His heart beat thud-a-thud, thud-a-thud, in contrast to the uneven wails of the violins. On the outside, grief was expressed in judders, faltering and unsure, but inside it felt as constant as breathing. As the violins reached a crescendo, the bear raised his snout and released a roar loud enough to shake the entire island. From the crowd came scattered screams, children's sobs, a collective shift of feet as they got ready to run. The bear collapsed in the middle of the stage, cradling North as they landed, wrapping his paws around her. The spotlight shifted to center on them. So great was her bear, so thick his fur that only the tiniest gleam of her skin was exposed to the air. The violins died. The crowd held their breath. And then North was resurrected. One arm swayed up, slender and pale as an anemone. It reached to cradle the bear's shadowed face. He lumbered to his feet as if he'd been hit, backing away from North into the shadows. She was left alone in the spotlight. Her body was curved into a comma, her white dress spread. In silence, she twisted on the ground, arching her back and looking over her shoulder at the bear, as if taking strength from him. The violins slid back, a single note, wavering. Slowly, slowly, she got to her knees, as if in a trance. Slowly, slowly, she used her hidden razor blade to slit the front of her dress. The white fabric fell to the ground, and the crowd shifted in their seats. On the female side, the women tilted their heads away, and the children peeped from between their fingers. On the male side, the men leaned forward with their elbows on their knees. North stood, and she was not a she. Her body fitted the silhouettes of a boy's. Her small breasts, her growing belly, all wrapped tight, all padded and bound in white. Her body gleamed like a marble statue. The styled tumble of her dark hair, now that the crowd looked more closely, seemed more like the mane of an unkempt boy. Blink, and she's a girl. Blink again, and he's a boy. Once more, he turns to she, right in front of your eyes. The violins fattened into a rhythm, from a dirge for loss to a tango for love. North reached into the shadows and pulled the bear into the spotlight. He seemed confused, standing hunched at the edge of the light. She took his paw in her hand and turned, pirouetting into his arms. They swayed together, boy and bear, now girl and bear, but always lovers. North's bear had brought her back. She had returned to him, as she would always return to him. They circled the edge of the spotlight together, North twisting in and out of the bear's grasp as they turned. In the centre of the stage they stopped, North's back to her bear's front. She brought her ankles together and stretched out her arms, lifting the bear's paws with them. They stood, white on black, aping a cross. Then the bear folded his front paws around her, enclosing her in his fur, his darkness covering every bit of her. Gripping his paws, she rolled her body up into his grasp, and they exited the stage to a chaos of violins. But no matter how loud the music, how bright the lights, none of the crowd could have failed to see the bear's peeled back lips or hear his steady growling. Red Gold swept past them to the stage, patting North and the bear on their shoulders. North's heart was beating so hard that she felt sick, but she forced her mouth into a smile for the ringmaster. She glanced past the curtains to Barrow, hoping for a wink of reassurance, but he was hunched over the gramophone, fiddling with the needle. His thick beard hid his expression. From the stage came the boom of Red Gold's voice announcing the next act. North pulled her bear into the salty embrace of the curtains. In the narrow confines of behind curtains, circus folk were all around her, preparing for their acts. Everything was the flash of colours and movement and frantic whispers. The growl still vibrated in the bear's chest. His jaw was clenched, his teeth bared. North still held the razor blades in her shaking hands. The bear's canines were as long as North's fingers. The scent of his meat-rot breath grew as he growled louder. She raised her hand. She hesitated. Then she tucked away the blades, unclipped the bear's chains and stroked her hands along his broad neck, murmuring platitudes, soothing him with familiarity. His growl died down and he dropped to all fours. He seemed ready to lie down and sleep right there among the curtains. North wished he could. She wished they both could. A hand on her shoulder. She spun round, fists raised, teeth bared, ready to shout. Melia and Whitby backed away, eyes wide. Sorry, mouthed North, lowering her hands. Sorry. Tense. The show. She nodded towards the stage. Funeral waltz. The acrobat smiled and squeezed North's hands consolingly. She hoped they couldn't feel how badly she was shaking. Our second act. Clown military, they mouthed to her. The clowns will love it. They nodded towards the crowd. North knew how Melia and Whitby felt about the military acts. It was one thing to parody the resurrection. Although the revival boats were getting popular, most people weren't religious, and those that were often didn't speak out for fear of being thought strange. But to mock the military? It was suicidal. The Excalibur's crew had spent time on a prison boat for it before, and there was no way to know how these landlockers would react. North hoped that Red Gold knew what he was doing. North nodded to the acrobats to show her support, then turned back to her bear. Her hands still shook and her head throbbed with panic. No matter what went wrong in the act, a happy crowd mollified Red Gold. But North was not worried about the ringmaster. She was not worried about the military or even the prison boat. She was worried about her bear. They'd done the funeral waltz before, but not like this. He was not supposed to lift her. He was not supposed to roar. Did he understand that it was just a show? When she was lying in his arms, when she would not speak or move or open her eyes, did he know that she was only pretending? Not for the first time, North wondered what would happen to her bear when, inevitably, she could no longer do her act. Whether she married Ensel and moved to land, or was forced off the Excalibur by Red Gold. Either way, the ringmaster owned her bear. She doubted anyone else could learn to perform with him. He could not be used for farming or kept as a pet. He was meat for dinner, a fur coat, claws and teeth perfect for weapons. North led her bear back to their boat. She would wash the colours off their skins and they would be themselves again. Alone in their coracle, they were not performers, not burdens, not dangers, not weapons, not food. They were family.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay.
I was really freaked out with the razor blades and the way the pause of what she was going to do. It's like, ah!
So tense. What do you think?
Very exciting.
Mm.
It is a tonal shift, you're right. It's a bit more serious.
Very
Mixing it up. It will all be okay.
Do you want to say that again?
I've seen Grizzly Man.
You've what, my love?
I've seen Grizzly Man. Is it going to be okay?
Bear is very scary.
Do it.
Everything's going to be okay. Everything is going to be okay. I mean, some things aren't going to be okay. Most things are going to be fine. Well, some things are going to be fine.
Oh, hun. Some things are going to be.
Some things are going to be. Yes. It will all be okay in the end. Yes. You'll like it. How's that?
What will be, will be.
You'll mostly, eventually like it.
So I didn't realize that this is the same person, the same author who wrote The Rental Heart and A Portable Shelter.
Mm-hmm.
Fucking A. Awesome.
Yeah, right? So tonally like that, in a kind of, it will all be like, maybe not amazing, but sort of, you know, as it should be. Mike, sweetie! Oh, baby boy. Oh, darling.
It turned out the bear was a handsome prince.
If it all gets too real for you and you want to skip this book and wait for, you know, the next like snuggly wholesome one, that is fine. I won't blame you.
Okay.
Oh no! Oh, I feel terrible now. Should we stop this? Should we stop this and do sequel to Dealing with Dragons instead?
No, I'm loving this very serious retelling of Waterworld so far.
The bear is played by Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner is definitely the bear. Yeah.
I want fan art of that. Kevin Costner furry fan art.
That definitely exists. Yeah. Waterworld is a cult like classic.
I do actually really want to watch Waterworld now.
No.
Not right now. But like, there's jet ski gangs. It's awesome.
There are jet ski gangs. It's basically Mad Max Fury Road, but on water.
Fury. Say, yeah, watch Old Mad Max.
maybe you could do like a watch party after this book. Storytime Waterworld watch party.
We were gonna do that for Matilda, and I don't know if we ever did.
Yeah.
I think, was there going to be a Pride and Prejudice one as well? I don't know if that necessarily
Some of
happened.
us did.
Some of you guys did. Cool. Right. I think should we finish the recording? Should we stop the recording? Should we say goodbye to the catch-up crew? Okay. Catch up crew. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're enjoying this. Goodbye, catch up crew. We love you.
Bye, catch up.
Goodbye.